This Voice of San Diego podcast is sponsored in part by Competitive Edge Research. Competitive Edge Research, San Diego's premier public opinion research firm, sponsors this podcast because they like good journalism as much as they like good polling. Since 1987, Competitive Edge has helped clients see the why buried deep within the numbers. Competitive Edge designs comprehensive research studies, collects bulletproof data, and employs robust analytics so you'll understand why things are the way they are. Competitive Edge. Know what to do.
Thanks for joining us on the Voice of San Diego podcast. My name is Scott Lewis, I'm the editor-in-chief at Voice. I'm also joined here by assistant editor Andrew Keats.
Scott, how's it going, bud?
Good. How are you?
Doing okay.
Okay. And also in the room is Sarah Libby, our managing editor.
Hello, I am in the room.
You are present.
It's where I am.
Sarah's in the room, but do you know who's in the house?
Who?
Landon Donovan
Landon Donovan
is in the house.
in the house. I'm
Yes.
really stoked about that.
The
news.
only important house.
It's pretty cool.
It's good.
Like, unironically, obviously, but it is quite cool. I'm gonna go. Pretty excited to see Landon Donovan play.
It's really exciting that he's going to be the second most important player on the Sockers behind Craig Childs.
Well, let's just be clear. Landon Donovan, arguably the greatest soccer player in the U.S. history, maybe.
He's certainly on the Mount Rushmore
Not
of
that
U.S.
there's
soccer.
not that there's an elite group, but there's he is that, and he has announced that he's going to play for the Sockers, the indoor soccer league, and the Sockers have a great history here. And you know, a lot of people thought he was going to drop off the face of San Diego's scene when the Soccer City measure that he supported failed, but he's done the opposite. I agree. We have a great show today. We are going to talk about some news. We've got some news today. Brian Maienschein left the Republican Party.
I think you forgot a couple syllables there.
What?
It's Maienschein. Maienschein.
No, it's not. It's Maienschein.
There's a few more vowels.
That's
in there.
why we say it that way, so we remember how to say it or to spell it. Maienschein. That's how I remember how to say it.
That would be true
if
we didn't have an office-wide joke of spelling it with 37
Yes.
vowels in
Yes.
the middle.
Guys, Brian Maienschein is coming.
It's a remarkable word because you could add any number and any combination of vowels in the two in the main and the shine, and it will always
It
read
looks the same.
Look
as
right.
Maienschein.
Well, it's remarkable we get it correct all the time, though. He is no longer a Republican. That blows my mind. 2003, Scott, is just blown away right now.
Mm-hmm.
This is fascinating news. We're going to talk. We're gonna deconstruct that news as far as it goes. There's going to be nothing left of it. We are deep in it. We also have our education reporter Will Hunsberry going to come in to talk about the story he and Kayla Jimenez did about really disturbing investigation that they revealed this week. So a lot to go over. Also, a hero and GOAT, our hero and San Diego Unified of the week.
Yes.
And then we have a new People's Reporter. Let us know what you think about that, by the way. We're having the team is having a lot of fun. All the stories they're doing responding to people's questions seem to be getting a lot of traffic, so we will get into that. Another one this week. All right, first, though, let's talk about some news. This week, the city of San Diego has been trying for a decade. It's been a decade. Can you believe that? Been a decade to remake the Central Mesa of Balboa Park. It would create new parking garage, move cars out of the plazas. It would also get rid of the Oregon Pavilion parking lot and replace that with more plaza and park. The city was finally able to ask for construction bids and got some bad news back. The lowest bid is $20 million more than projected. So the philanthropists involved in the project and the city will have to decide if they can absorb that much cost at least, right?
Worth noting, this is a escalation of cost before the project has started.
Right.
Yes.
Should also expect, as most capital projects, cost overruns over the course of construction as well.
Well, these days, the modern, like the library and stuff like that, the construction companies have said this is ceiling capped cost. So they usually say we'll just absorb whatever overruns we have on that. Now I know that there's obviously cases when that could happen, but you're right. Like this is just the first stage. And if it delays another 2 years or something because of legislation or lawsuits, could be even worse.
Yeah.
So you pointed out the construction cost index for the state is actually just skyrocketing, right? Like is it tariffs or what?
I don't have any reported information on that, so it would be irresponsible to answer. I was told by somebody in the know that it was not primarily driven by tariffs at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's a shortage of
Labor costs and all that stuff, construction costs, steel, sand.
Yeah, steel I think is a big part of it.
All those things. So that project is what would you put it at actually happening?
It's the last couple of years of it have been strange, where it's moving steadily along and like slowly, but it is always going forward. They are constantly moving themselves to the next step, but I don't know. It does.
And yet I would still call it a San Diego special.
Oh yeah, of course, 100%.
Yes,
You think
The
that qualifies?
uncontroversial. That qualifies.
it's a classic.
Classic. I mean, there's still no like broad consensus that this should happen. I mean,
That's what I mean. Usually, a San Diego special is a broad consensus that something needs to be fixed, and we kind of have an idea what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But this seems like there's not a consensus that this needs to be fixed at all.
Yes, that is accurate. I guess I just need to, if anybody remembers our past conversation about the San Diego special, I need to just own up to the fact that I have no idea what it is.
Well,
I think
the definition, none
broadly,
of it
Just
just
things that
like
we struggle
a
with.
thing
Yeah.
we can't get done.
that's
makes
true.
sense. Yeah.
So the one thing I would point out on this, I have seen this story play out in the past. Erwin Jacobs, full disclosure, supporter of Voice San Diego, he was the prime supporter of the library downtown, and it went through its own decade of ups and downs. And I remember thinking like, well, this is it. It's gone up too much. There's no way they can do it. And then he just covered the difference. So, maybe that sort of thing will happen. I know that he's not that interested in covering the difference on this. We'll see if they rally support. Him and the mayor have been raising money for it. All right. Another bit of news. So we were talking after the mayor's State of the Union or State of the City. He came in, of course, and talked more about some specific things that were in that. And one of the things that caught our eye the most, of course, and our ears the most, was this issue of getting rid of height limits around transit priority areas. And, if you want to build housing near a transit stop, you should be able to build big housing units around there. And so that we thought would come with some backlash, and that backlash has started. Here was Barbara Bree. She's running for mayor. She was on KUSI the other day in the morning, and she brought some response to the mayor's State of the Union and that height limits question.
To be clear, one thing the mayor said is he would remove height limits citywide. I disagree with that. I think each neighborhood and community is unique, and there should be no blanket policy like that citywide.
Let's just clarify a couple of things. His proposal is not citywide, right? There's the one issue, not only of it being, it doesn't cover the coast. Right. Anything west of I-5 is not covered in this because of another city law. But then also it's just about transit priority areas. So there can still be height limits in other areas, but not transit priorities here. Can you define, Andrew Keats, noted land use expert, Andrew Keats, what is a transit priority area?
It is a half mile, as the crow flies, surrounding a high-frequency transit stop, which is defined as either a rail station, any rail station, or the intersection of two bus lines that run at least 15-minute headways during peak travel times.
Okay, so the second one is the one I didn't understand. So if you have one bus stop near your house, that doesn't count.
Right.
But if you have like Old Town Transit Center, that counts. Well, that would count for a number of reasons.
Yes.
Okay, so like
North Park, in the heart of North Park, both the 2 and the 7 run there. The 2 runs north-south and the 7 runs east-west, and they both run at relatively high frequencies. And so therefore, that area would be included.
So you could have a height limit, like say around Mission Hills or something, but if the moment it crosses over to the transit priority area, that's where the height limits would get released if the city council approves the mayor's plan on this.
Yeah, I should also add that they also include planned transit stations.
Okay. So like Morena Boulevard
Yeah.
stuff. All right. Let me ask you another point on this. Is there a map of these transit priorities somewhere?
There are, and we've posted it on the morning report last week. I could pull out that link and put it in the show notes, and people can take a look. It covers a lot of the city.
Maybe it's something
it's a very large section of the city.
All right. One last question.
Yeah.
If you have a transit stop and then there's a giant canyon, but then there's another like neighborhood that's right across
this is one of the
canyon?
flaws of the transit. It's as the crow flies. So you may not be a half a mile walking distance to the transit stop because you would walk along the streets, and when you'd have to go roundabout around a canyon, it's kind of a blunt force instrument that this transit priority area works. They don't specify that stuff. They just put a half-mile circle over the transit stop. If you're separated by a canyon, if there's windy streets, if whatever, it's as the crow flies.
Okay. Well, we're starting to see her mayoral rhetoric and framing come into focus, but also this is just the debate we're going to watch over the next couple of months. So
let me also add on her pushback here. So the one thing I'm a little apprehensive about the story I wrote last week was the extent to which it was like a prediction.
yeah.
I didn't mean it that way. What I meant was merely that we've been dancing around these sorts of disagreements, and in my estimation, having covered this, there is a true disagreement on the merits undergirding those conversations, and that this is a real escalation of that situation. That being the case, what she's saying here, she clearly outlines a disagreement with the mayor, but I would say that this is pretty tepid as far as backlash goes.
Sure.
You know, she's saying, I don't like the policy mechanism here, but she didn't come right out and embrace the spirit of the opposition, which would be something along the lines of, why are you destroying our quality of life?
Right.
Why are you doing this to us? People have bought into us, etc.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if she does go there. Yeah,
Exactly.
great point. All right. Also, Mayor Kevin Faulconer was on CNN the other day talking about Mexico and the border, and caught our eye. Here's what he said.
Do you need a new wall along the San Diego border with Mexico?
Well, look, we've had border fencing as part of in San Diego for decades.
Yeah.
And you know, Poppy, you just talked about security. Just this last year, we were named the safest big city in America. We're proud of that. And I'm proud of our relationship with our neighbors right next door in Mexico. You know, I don't talk about building walls. I talk about building bridges and increasing that communication, increasing that flow.
So that'll be that's a classic kind of Kevin Faulconer thing. Doesn't really engage the specific debate, but did by not joining the sort of build the wall frenzy. That's kind of a significant point, right?
It's funny that his answer is like the kind of thing that provides fodder to both sides, because he's kind of saying, well, we don't need a wall, and the evidence is that we're the safest city in America. And then other people will take that and just like tweak it slightly and be like, San Diego is proof that walls work. They're the safest big city in America.
Well, this gets to the stupidest part of this whole discussion, which is that nobody has defined wall yet.
Right.
And every time we start to get close, the mayor or the president will start to say like, well, steel slats or a barrier of some kind. I don't care. But then you push him on it, and he's like, no, it has to be a wall. So are we talking about the prototypes, the 30-foot concrete things that he put up? Or are we talking about the barriers? Like, is what's here in San Diego what he's okay with throughout the rest of the urbanized areas of the border? Or what are we talking about?
Yeah, and just not too far away in Calexico, they have a fence. They've always had a fence, and they've been fortifying the fence and repairing it, and they've touted that as the wall. So they kind of want to have it both ways.
I mean, it feels hopelessly naive to point out that there's a lack of consistency and basic fact undergirding this debate. But I'll just add that if in the summer of 2015 the rallying cry was build a fence like they have in San Diego, or reinforce the fences that already exist in areas like Calexico,
existing pieces of the wall or fence,
may not have blossomed to the current conversation we have. So you can't have it both ways, that the things that are in place already are already a wall, and therefore if you oppose a wall, you're a hypocrite, and also claim that the existing status quo was a miserable failure, and that's why we need this wholesale change towards something called a wall.
Right, exactly. All right, let's get into this news. Sometimes news just falls into the newsroom, gets us all the heart rate goes up. Everything's just making calls, getting texts. I got a text early this morning that said something big was coming in Sacramento. Turns out there was. Brian Maienschein, Assemblyman Brian Maienschein, left the Republican Party. Now, he was a city councilman in the city of San Diego, kind of left public office for a while and then got back in, ran for assembly. He has been a big part of the Republican Party locally, been very supportive of the Republican Party, and vice versa. It has supported it has supported him. And so this has just lit up the town as far as political watchers. Carl DeMaio, this made me laugh. Carl DeMaio tweeted, "This is not surprising at all. I saw this coming." And Ron Naring, former head of the Republican Party in California, said, "This is really surprising. This is crazy." He was even like, "I don't even believe it
He
yet."
shot down like the initial reports that this was happening. I would be very surprised.
Yeah, I don't know. He was very skeptical. So in Maienschein's own statement, obviously people would assume it had to do with Trump. He said Donald Trump has led the Republican Party to the extreme on issues that divide our country, but his leadership is not the lone reason for my change in the party. And then he went through like a laundry list of rather liberal takes.
Yeah.
We should not have to fear automatic weapons. Something about labor unions, right? Organized labor provides protection for a good workforce. Healthcare should be accessible to all people. You shouldn't have to decide between medicine and buying groceries. I would never want to interfere with a woman's right to choose. So it was what
it's interesting because they're departures not from the Trumpist version of the Republican Party, but every version of the Republican Party that has existed in my lifetime.
I mean, there's been some like Romney, like we believe in universal health care, not socialized medicine or whatever.
I mean, that would be true if this wasn't California. There's always been like a California version of the Republican Party that is like the Republican Party light.
But that's what we're seeing sort of like fracture right now,
yes,
right?
Yeah,
definitely.
I think, do you think in 2004 you could have been a Republican in good standing saying, I'm for gun control, abortion,
yeah, probably not.
Universal health care coverage, and
Labor
organized labor.
Yeah, that's true. That's okay, very well put. So if you were a listener to the Voice of San Diego podcast, you might have suspected this was coming. We had Lorena Gonzalez and Nathan Fletcher in here. Lorena Gonzalez, Assemblywoman. Nathan Fletcher, now newly elected county supervisor, and
who used to represent that district in the assembly.
Right. And I asked Lorena why she had refused to support Brian Maienschein's rival, the Democrat, for his seat, who came really close to winning that seat. And had a lot of people were upset, like had she supported her, the San Diego governor, then it might have worked. She might have won, or at least it didn't take much. And so we asked her, and she was like, "Look, I like Brian. I relied on him. He helped me. But she also clarified she couldn't support him. So she didn't oppose him, but she couldn't support him. And this is why she said she couldn't support him at the time.
I could have never supported him for the simple reason that he remains in the party of Trump. And so there is a difference between not being involved in a race because you have respect for somebody and wanting to be respectful of that. But I think right now it's really tough to look at any Republican and say, how can you stay? I mean, given your person, especially one you know well, right? You know their values and you know that they're good people and have decent beliefs, and like, how do you stay?
Okay, so is there a place in the Democratic Party for a Brian Maienschein that's the exact copy, principle-wise and policy-wise, that he is? Does he fit in that coalition?
I think he does.
So kind of foreshadowed that. Obviously, he thought the same, made the choice, made the switch.
Yeah.
Glad for everybody spent all those hours monitoring the every single ballot count in that race.
So many refreshing clicks.
Yeah, well,
and
and that's what the Republicans seem to be most upset about right now, other than Marie Waldron called him a turncoat, right?
Yeah.
But he asked for and got a lot of support in those last few weeks as the votes were being counted, to make sure to monitor the election results, and the Republican Party and his partisans were there helping him and helping all that, and so they think of it as like, a few weeks ago you wanted money. What happened?
Yeah.
All right. So I did want to bring up one thing. He hasn't. We'll see. We'll have to bring him in and talk to him about it. He was pretty conservative on some points that might be interesting to watch going forward. Here was Maienschein in 2017 about the gas tax.
We pay a lot in gas taxes already. The state hasn't shown that money, the current amount of gas tax money, is going to new projects or improving projects or repair. I'm for repairing our roads. We should repair our roads. We have money set aside to repair roads. It just doesn't get there. And you want to add one other thing? I mean, the high-speed rail is just such a boondoggle. The money that's gone, that's just been poured, good money after bad. I mean, it's just such a disaster.
So I think this highlights like if the future of California politics and the future of San Diego politics are this sort of intra-party Democratic squabble, that's the kind of line it might break down on, right?
So the vote count now is what? It went from 60 out of 80 Democrats to 61 out of 80 Democrats. Okay. So look, the effect here, as from a party perspective, is the same as it would have been had Sunday Gover won, right?
Right. So
in that respect, you should treat it exactly as significantly as winning an election. On the other hand, I mean, what is the ultimate difference between 60 and 61 in terms of governing from California?
I think the major difference is he gets to probably keep that seat for the next 6 years. So we'll see if that works. All right, we're gonna come right back. We have a discussion with Will Huntsberry about his big story and Kayla Jimenez's big story this week, and our hero and goat of the week, along with the People's Reporter. Stay tuned.
Voice of San Diego podcasts are sponsored in part by the Museum of Photographic Arts. Join the conversation at the Human Rights Watch Film Festival, January 31st through February 2nd at the Museum of Photographic Arts. Be inspired by powerful films and discussions on human rights issues from around the world. Filmmakers and Human Rights Watch experts will be there to discuss many of the topics raised in the films. Visit mopa.org/HRWFF for information. As a nonprofit news organization, Voice of San Diego depends on our members and sponsors. If you'd like to become a sponsor, contact us at development@voiceofsandiego.org.
Okay, the story we're about to discuss contains some disturbing details about sexual violence and other issues of misconduct. So this is your warning for that. There's also some very frank and disturbing language. Okay, we are back. All right, sometimes we come out with stories that are hard to talk about. They're disturbing, plainly disturbing. This week, we released a story about a school district, a man that had been accused of misconduct and then was accused of probably the most horrific thing we've heard about in these school investigations we've done. So joining us in the studios, Will Huntsberry. Welcome, Will.
Hey, guys.
And he and Kayla Jimenez did a story about Mission Middle School in Escondido and how the district reacted in Escondido to some accusations that happened. Start from the beginning, what happened, and we'll transition to what it meant.
Yeah, well, like you said, Scott, it was certainly a disturbing story to work on. Kayla was doing great work going through these extensive files we had of all 42 school districts in the county, and came across this story of a man named Joshua French, who was an 8th grade social studies teacher in Escondido Union. There had been a lot of complaints about him along the way that weren't necessarily answered, the biggest of which was somebody who's known as Jane Doe in the case files reported that he raped her inside a locked classroom. And then the district sprang into action. They took him off the job. A big investigation ensued. But this is a story where there were just tons of missed warning signs about this guy's sexualizing of the classroom.
Well, so before we get to those, tell me about him. Tell me about Josh French, what he was like in the classroom, what he was like in the school.
Sure. Josh French's dad had worked at Escondido Union. He told me in several conversations with him that he had come from a long line of educators, actually. And his dad was known for bringing this kind of fun-loving environment, and I think Josh tried to also bring some passion to the job. You know, he told me that he dressed up for the people he was teaching about with early American history. He also seemed to be somebody, he was young and he was energetic. He was this white guy at a primarily Latino school, a high poverty school. And it seemed like he brought a lot of energy and authoritative presence, you know, where he would draw boundaries with students well and worked with some students well. I think much more boys than girl students in this case. But, you know, he was somebody who had some supporters, definitely. But then there was this whole underlayer that I was talking about of people who noticed this toxic streak in his behavior.
Yeah. So these warning signs you were mentioning related to this toxic behavior. What was the timeline of those? How many of these sorts of things were there in his file?
So, this story takes place over several years. Jane Doe came forward in 2015 to talk about stuff that had happened to her in 2010. And so between 2008 and 2010, you had lots of students, more than a dozen, coming to different workers at that school to talk about this guy's behavior. They spoke to at least 3 school workers about how the biggest accusation is that French would stare down girls' shirts really blatantly. He'd sit the prettiest girls in class at the front of his class, and then he'd stand at the lectern and leer at them and stare down their shirts, or he'd stand above them as they were working and do that. And so you had lots of young women saying this to different teachers, and the different teachers just had pretty hard to imagine responses, really. You know, one guy who said at least a dozen came to him, told them to write incident reports. He doesn't appear to have passed this on to a superior in any way. A wholly different person told them not to wear low-cut shirts. Another person told them to put binders in front of their chest. So, I mean, I guess it's what we've almost come to see as classic in this new era of awareness about sexual assault. All these people were telling the girls to change their behavior, and they weren't saying anything to French about changing his own behavior.
One thing I think is worth pointing out is that a lot of the stories that we've done on this topic have almost uniformly been about high schoolers and often about girls where they developed relationships with teachers and they were maybe 16, 17, which is still illegal. We're talking about middle school girls here. We're talking about girls who are 12, 13 years old. And so I think if you consider some of those responses in that context, it's even more disturbing that they were being told to, you know, adjust their own behavior when you're at a point where like you're so uncomfortable with your body and so uncomfortable, you know, approaching authority to talk about some kinds of these issues.
And one of the other things we've seen in a lot of these stories is the track record of behavior with other female teachers at the school.
Yes.
Was that present here as well?
Other female teachers, you said. So it appears that at least one of these people who was informed about from the girls what was happening, probably 2 out of the 3 were women. They seemed to know the least about French's behavior. They had been approached by fewer girls. There was a third person who was a man. And, you know, to Sarah's point about these young girls' age, there was a man who was a teacher. French was friends with him outside of work, the teacher told investigators. And he just said some really upsetting stuff to the teacher. You know, he said that he admitted that he put the girls with the bigger, air quotes, tits in front so he could stare at them. He said these girls should know how to give a blowjob by the time they reach puberty. And this guy, so, to imagine that he's hearing this stuff from French, this teacher, and he's hearing it from students, and he's not acting, it bends the imagination.
Yeah. So when you transition to what this means, so part of what we were interested in, as well as how long it took the school to react, not just because of the earlier complaints, but then how long it takes for his credentials to be removed. And that was, he was actually, after he was accused of rape and the investigation was going on, he was able to continue substitute teaching in other districts for not an insignificant amount of time, right?
14 months. Yeah, 14 months. And he taught at 2 school districts, Vista Unified and Murrieta Valley Unified. And this is something that's really common. I mean, a teacher can do something at one school district. There can be this big official investigation that finds there was wrongdoing, just like in French's case. Then they have to pass the investigation to the state, to the credentialing committee, and it takes like a median of 2 years for their credential to be revoked. And during that time, if they apply to a job, especially as a substitute teacher, and the district doesn't check in on their past work history, then, they're right back in the classroom while this like bureaucratic removal process of their credential takes place.
And so that was the case here, that this was the subject of an investigation that substantiated the charges. What did the investigation find? So that, to be clear, whether to the extent that we're talking about accusations versus substantiated findings.
Totally. So, I mean, we should say Josh French has never been charged with a crime. First off, he was investigated by the Escondido police, and their investigation stalled for reasons that they would not talk to us about. And he was investigated by the school district, which hired a private investigator to conduct an investigation on its behalf. And yeah, when we get these records, we only can get them if the misconduct is substantial and if the allegations have been substantiated, meaning that the district found cause to believe they existed.
So in the investigation, they actually moved to fire him, and they laid out a document for the school board outlining why they recommended that he should be fired. And in it, they, say, we believe he committed, sexual abuse and all this different type of behavior. They ended up striking a deal in which he agreed to resign, so he was not actually fired. But they actually went through that process and said to the school board, we believe he committed these acts.
And we were not able to find Jane Doe, right?
That's right. Yeah, we couldn't track her down. She's not named.
And she, the police seemed to say like she wasn't willing to pursue the case further after she'd been involved for a while, right?
It's a little vague. There's handwritten notes in the case file that said had trouble contacting Jane Doe. We think it's something along those lines, and in this, with a rape case, you have to have a survivor who's willing to testify pretty much to bring a charge.
Right. Well, obviously very heavy stuff. I would encourage you to read Will Huntsberry and Kayla Jimenez's piece in voiceofsandiego.org. It'll obviously be prominent on our site for a while. Will, thanks. Great work.
Thanks, guys.
All right, our hero of the week.
This goes to our friends at KPBS, who are suing the San Diego County Sheriff's Department in order to obtain records that they've sought under the California Public Records Act. This is something that we unfortunately have had a lot of experience with over the last couple years, as the case that Will was just talking about demonstrates. We've had to go to court to obtain a lot of records, and one thing that's, kind of sad is that in a lot of cases that's the only way that you can really enforce your rights under the Public Records Act. So they've been working, they said, for about 7 months to try to obtain some records that would shed light on this sheriff's deputy, and have been coming up empty. And so we're cheering them on in that pursuit. and good luck.
Yeah, our the attorney we work with at Shepherd Mullen, Matt
Hallgren
is involved, and thank you to him for getting involved in that stuff.
Friend to journalists.
Yeah, it'd be nice to see another legal advocate like that rise up with some experience in that role. So good, thank you, KPBS.
It's clear that there's a trend among public agencies in San Diego responding this way. So hopefully there continues to be a trend among local news outlets in responding in this way.
Now, is this related to the new law that allows these records to be seen and they're blocking it, or is this something that would have happened no matter what?
So, yes and no. I think that they believe that the new law strengthens their case, but I think what's happening...
The sheriffs do.
No, the KPBS does.
Right, got it.
The Sheriff's Department is relying on an exemption to the Public Records Act that KPBS and Matt Hallgren think doesn't hold up, and so they're pursuing it kind of on those grounds.
Got it. All right, our GOAT of the week.
You lose. Good day, sir.
You're hold on to your seats. It's gonna shock you, but we are giving the GOAT of the week to the San Diego Unified School District. The San Diego Unified School District of the week is the San Diego Unified School District.
Exactly.
They decided, the Board of Education at the San Diego Unified School District decided to move public comment, a non-agenda public comment, a fixture of local public meetings everywhere, which is the time that you get to go up and speak about anything. You can go and say, you should, do this. You should add a whole new school for this, or whatever. You can say anything you want. And it's a way for the public to access the people who govern its systems. They have decided to move that part of public access to the end of meetings, which means that if you wanted to participate in that, you'd have to just wait for hours and hours and hours, an indeterminate amount of time to get your chance to weigh in. Like it's at least when it's at the beginning, you can go and have it and get out or whatever. It's known when it'll happen. This is bananas.
Yeah, one thing that strikes me as particularly like twisting the knife is like city council or a board of supervisors meeting. Those groups are like the entire public, really. Yeah. This is a specific group that governs like families with kids. And so these meetings happen at night, and sometimes they don't end until 9 p.m. And so you're saying to a group that is specifically parents of kids, you have to like figure out what to do with these children. And as you're putting them to bed, that's the time that you could go.
Yeah, or literally you have to give up your whole night to
yes.
go. And what's more like exactly. They usually set aside some sort of access responsibilities there. This is just really upsetting. I cannot think of an agency that's more hostile to the public access to its documents, to its to just commentary, to anything than this, to voting, everything.
Yeah, I mean, I can't see a way to view this as anything other than a direct attempt to stifle public feedback. Yeah. I mean, it will result in fewer people engaging in this practice. This, as you say, common trait of all public hearings.
Yeah, it's a fixture of democracy. I mean, when that visitor from Russia was staying with us, the idea that you could go and speak directly to the people who were making these decisions and you could access them was he was just shocked, and he was just amazed that was just something we took for granted. And apparently we shouldn't take it for granted.
No, luckily we can just casually make it much, much more burdensome for very little benefit.
If you have ever wondered why some streets get fixed when they do and why others do not, we have your answer at the People's Reporter. This feature's been pretty popular, and I'm excited about it. So listen to the team explain that answer now.
Turn left onto Claremont Mesa Boulevard. Then your destination will be on the right.
Welcome to the People's Reporter, a Voice of San Diego feature where we gather questions from listeners like you, then answer those questions. I'm Lisa Halverstadt.
And I'm Adriana Heldies. This week, we're going to tackle another question people care a lot about.
This one comes from Mitch, a reader from Mission Hills. Here's his question. How are city streets being repaired, and who determines the allocations of scarce resources?
This is a great question, and one that a lot of people might have, especially anyone driving on San Diego streets, which is a lot of us.
Yep.
Lisa, you dug into this. What did you find?
Well, when it comes to street repairs, you can blame the city's street division, or you can thank them, depending on how you like the streets that you drive on. The street division decides which projects get done. They also decide when they get done and exactly how the city fixes them.
Okay, so there's a lot of streets in the city.
Yep, about 3,000 miles of streets.
So how do they decide which ones they're going to work on?
There are a few different things that they have to take into consideration. The big one is a major assessment that the division does. It hires a consultant every 4 years to review all the city streets. They decide which ones need repairing and what type of repairs. Basically, they score them.
Okay, so they assess the streets and figure out what needs attention. What else do they do?
The city also considers requests it's gotten. Residents can and certainly do send their requests. The amount of traffic is also consideration. Also, if there are major public safety issues. The city also has to think about funding and other projects in the area. In other words, there are lots of things that go into whether the city is going to fix your street. And the city says roads that tend to get more traffic do tend to get fixed more quickly.
But some more traveled streets aren't getting this attention. Mitch, who asked us this question, was especially curious about Claremont Mesa Boulevard. He wanted to know why part of the street hasn't been fixed for years.
So I asked the city about this area. It's heavily trafficked. It's very wide. It's a big street. It turns out that the city still needs to get permits from Caltrans to fix the area that Mitch was most concerned about. And this is part of the big challenge. Things get more complicated when the street division also has to coordinate with other agencies or even city departments.
Oh, I get it. So there are some things that the city can do by itself, but some spots that just happen to intersect with another agency tend to hold things up, right?
Right, that's a thing sometimes. And there's an even bigger problem for Mitch just up the street. The city has a major pipe project that it expects will take 3 years. And right now, they think that that project will start next summer. So they're holding off on any repairs to much of Claremont Mesa Boulevard until after that's done. So even though there are lots of potholes and uneven spots, as we documented, the city says it doesn't want to waste money and resources fixing a street that's about to become even more of a mess.
Yikes. Yeah, I was driving down the street this morning, and if you're a biker, there's definitely places that are not going to be pleasant for you.
Yeah, and this situation really illustrates another challenge when it comes to fixing streets. The city has to be really careful with how it schedules things. So sometimes streets essentially cut in line to get repaired. If the street doesn't have any work scheduled, maybe it can get fixed faster. Or if the work is less intense, that can sometimes bump it up too. The city can do a less invasive repair. And sometimes there are even emergencies too.
So aside from reaching out to you directly, how can people see what's going on with city streets? Like, how can they see what's being worked on or what's scheduled for the future?
Well, the city does have some easy resources if you want to check out what's happening on the streets you drive on most. You can visit streets.sandiego.gov for lots of info on street conditions and projects.
Okay, so listeners, we know you've got questions too. Send them our way. We'll choose the best ones and then ask you to vote for your favorites. Then we'll investigate and share what we've learned.
So, if you want to suggest a question or read more about street repairs, go to voiceofsandiego.org/peoplesreporter. Your question could be featured on an upcoming episode.
Thanks for listening to the Voice of San Diego podcast. If you want to follow everything Will Huntsberry is doing on education, he has a newsletter, The Learning Curve, comes out every 2 weeks. Of course, we have the Mooring Report, our most popular product, and you can get that every day. You can find all of those things at voiceofsandiego.org/newsletters. I'm Scott Lewis, CEO and Editor-in-Chief at Voice of San Diego. Andrew Keats is Assistant Editor, Sarah Libby, Managing Editor. And this show was made possible and produced by Nate John and Adriana Heldies. Thanks, and hear from us next time.